Welcome to the Wellbeing Designers podcast. My name is JAAQ. I am your host. This podcast is about well-being at work and in life. We discover how we can design the future of well-being together so we can create human-centric organizations and a sustainable work life. In the first season of the podcast, I talked with the first generation of well-being leaders in big organizations. Usually, they were the very first ones in their organization ever to have the title of Head of Wellbeing or similar. In the second season, starting with episode 9, you will meet similar people again, and I invited some other interesting profiles as well. All these people work on well-being on a systemic level. Their mission is related to make the world a better place through focusing on well-being. In the past years, especially since COVID, employee well-being got on the top of the agenda, not only for companies worldwide, but even some countries and other official institutions started to call for action. In the Wellbeing Designers podcast conversations, I would like to highlight the work of those sometimes invisible people, leaders, who are either in charge of well-being in organizations and trying to navigate amongst the growing amount of well-being offerings, while connecting efforts to business impact and, most importantly, create real value for employees. Or they are those leaders who are doing their best to create international forums to exchange, raise awareness, and take action on well-being and people sustainability. They might be the ones whose responsibility is to take care of hundreds, thousands, or 10,000s of people's well-being. They might be the ones who keep decision makers and CEOs engaged about the topic of well-being. They might be the ones who are proving that employee well-being is a strategic enabler of sustainable performance and business success. They might be the connectors between well-being leaders across companies and countries. I call these people well-being designers. Enjoy listening to them and learning from them. Together, we can design a human-centric work life and the future of well-being. Our guest today is Ryan Hopkins, who is based in London in the UK. Ryan is on a mission to engage 1 billion people in the betterment of well-being. When we recorded the podcast, he was still in the role of Future of Wellbeing leader at Deloitte. Now he is the Chief Impact Officer at JAAQ, a mental health platform. Ryan is also the host of the Audacious Goals Club, creator of Toilet Break Wellbeing, a TEDx speaker, and soon to be published author of the 52 Weeks of Wellbeing, a no-nonsense guide to a fulfilling work life, which is available in January 2024. Ryan's work has positively influenced the life of hundreds of thousands of people. He shares his personal story of bulimia, depression, anxiety openly, and has reached over 10 million on social media, recently being announced Global Emerging Wellbeing Leader of the Year. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, good morning. How are you doing?
Very well. Welcome to the Wellbeing Designers podcast. I am really happy to have you here. And you have a really tough morning, I know, but you still made it to be with us.
I now and again I treat myself to get the Uber boat like once every 2 weeks. It just feels so like bougie and posh, and I love it. So I went to get it this morning, and it ended up being one of the old ones, and there was no space, so I had to run back, get the train. Anyone that lives in London knows when you get the tube at rush hour slightly later than you want, it's hell on earth. we got here.
For the listeners who don't know, you sit in London in the UK, and I am in Switzerland. We are just connecting now via Zoom. So I already told a bit your story for the listeners. And you have also a lot out there on social media, including a TEDx talk about your story. But still, could you tell us a bit who you are, and most importantly, how did you get to this work, working with organizations on well-being?
How long do you want the answer to be?
I have some more questions, and we don't have so much time, so let's try to keep it short and sweet.
I'll try my best. So yeah, my name is Ryan. I'm currently the Future of Wellbeing leader at Deloitte, so I help companies and governments around the world to look after their people, and I bloody love it. So I've created this concept and then brought it back to Deloitte. Do lots of writing and speaking. As you're saying, I've just reached about 10 million people on socials now, cumulatively, which is pretty awesome. Did a TED talk recently, got a book coming out in January, 52 Weeks of Wellbeing. Why do I give a shit? Because like anyone who gets in this space, I went through some stuff and I want to try my best to help others not end up where I did. And if they do to know that they're not alone. So I speak as much as I can. I share my stuff fairly openly and try and create work that's good for people, because most well-meaning, well-being solutions, initiatives at workplaces currently aren't really working, to be honest, as well intended as they are. So I want to change the narrative and just build places where people can do what they need, because I know that what works for you doesn't work for me. So that's the intent.
Really appreciate that you are so, authentic, and you put your story out there. You said that, everyone has a story who is in this space, which is true, but, we have different stories, and we share it also on a different level. And I think you are one of the more extreme ones, how open you are about it.
Yeah, it takes time to get there though, right? Like at first I felt like I was the weirdest man on the face of the earth, and I was just a freak, and you feel incredibly alone. But as soon as you start sharing one piece of who you are authentically, you realize there are like 10, 100, 1,000 people like you. And then you really want to ratchet it up. You put on social media, and then you soon engage in millions, and you realize that all of us have got our own things going on. And if I'm able to share a few things that I've been through, like I haven't seen many men anywhere share that they've been through bulimia, had quite a severe period of depression, where I ended up in a place where I wanted to take my own life after an accident because I couldn't walk for about a year. Quite deep anxiety in and out as I put a lot of pressure on myself to come back from that injury and accident. And I don't know, yeah, one piece at a time, and just felt more comfortable. And now I feel that I can share it almost in any environment. And it's almost what used to like hold me back so much, I think, is what's propelling me now. And it's really quite odd. If I could go back and chat to that young man, I'd tell him. But I don't think he'd listen to me. He'd be like, "Nah, you're mental."
I find it a fascinating question, how much we still have to go through these deep and sometimes painful experiences in order to then give back something. We are working on so other people don't have to go through such painful experiences. And then, where is the sweet spot that you still, get this learning, the
Yeah.
experience, but maybe not as painful as someone
This
else.
in part, you can't put an old head on young shoulders or put yours on someone else's. And
Mm.
I could talk about my story until I'm blue in the face, as you could, as others that have been on your podcast could. But I see it time and again. People will not do what they need to do unless they are ready. And that is at their own time, on their own volition, when they've often been through something. It's a shame that we have to go through something to develop, but that's often what happens. But what we can do is create the space around them to know that they can advance. Yeah. They don't need to dwell there, and that there is a way forwards. But I do think often that you do have to go through these things, as much as I wish that weren't the case, to develop.
Yeah.
Resilience is a dirty word now, but to develop the resilience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What about your work that you have been doing today as a consultant? So for me, there are two sides of the question, because I also come from management consulting, and I know it's not easy to maintain your own well-being as a consultant. Plus, you also have to practice what you preach, because you work on the well-being of the organization and employees. So how is that working out for you?
with difficulty. I do what I do with passion, like as you do as well, which is why you created this to share with others, to like move it forwards. And that's why you're always smiling whenever I see you, because you love what you're doing. It's nice, but that's infectious. And I love what I do. And I've probably never worked harder than I am right now. And I'm not complaining. I'm very, very lucky. But like, I'm tired. I'm tired. Like, my back hurts. I don't stretch enough. My nutrition's gone a bit rubbish. I probably had a few more beers in the week than I probably should. I don't get it perfect, but I share that fairly openly, and I want to create the space so people can work out what they need. And then that brings me to the work. So most well-being strategies currently look squarely at the individual, so mental, physical, emotional, social. And it's kind of really grown, hasn't it, through the pandemic. It started side of desk, and I was one of those people. And then it was a full-time role, and you were allowed to put on a few events. And now I think there's a new thing that needs to change, because in organizations, only 1% to 2% are using any organizational data to measure the effectiveness of their efforts. So no one knows how effective anything we're doing in this space is on attrition, absenteeism, presenteeism, engagement, holiday days taken, all that stuff. It's all based on surveys, assumptions, qualitative feedback. And no other function in a business could operate that way. You couldn't go marketing and say, what's your engagement on LinkedIn this month? They go, we don't know, but we got a nice statement from someone. Or go to sales. How's the pipeline looking? No idea, but someone said a nice thing the other day. It doesn't work like that. But because this is so inherently personal, we do it with full energy. We need to drag it kicking and screaming forwards. And it needs to develop at work, because what we're doing right now is great to provide the apps, the webinars, the benefits, the bikes, bananas, and stuff like that. But is it improving things? It isn't, because we're seeing the metrics in the workplace worsen from a stress perspective, engagement, everything. So we need to change. And I think a lot of us will measure and find that we're not doing as well as we think we are, which is going to hurt, because we all do it with full heart. And no one gets into this space for the detriment of other people. They all do it because they want to help, and they often share what helped me that I think will help others. And that is fundamentally flawed, because that neglects that you live in Switzerland. Your life is very different to mine. And I just had to like sprint into the office and grab something to eat from Pret on the way in to make sure I get here with this podcast on time. And the switch is that it's not an organization's responsibility to improve happiness, but it is their responsibility not to worsen it. And when we flip that, we focus on creating the environment where people can do what they want. And then saying, when you're all good and ready, the stuff's over here. That's the switch for me that I'm trying to help people on. But it's tough to convince people to do less. I'm the world's worst management consultant, so I'm often advocating to do less.
Yeah, and the same for companies, right? That if people don't have time to do all these well-being offerings, then and they just got even more stressed about that.
The people that need the help are the ones where workload is the issue, and they haven't got a gap in between meetings this side of Christmas. So we need to change a little bit how we're doing stuff.
You mentioned well-being strategy. You work also with organizations on well-being strategies. Can you share a bit more about that? What else you do, or a typical, project that you have done, and you said, okay, this was really impactful, or the opposite, didn't work out well?
So often people only look into this when they realize there's a burning issue. And that's the unfortunate reality of the space that I occupy myself in at the moment. But then at least there's the understanding of the business that they need to do something different. It's never, we're doing really well, can we make it even better? It's often something is blown up. Can you come and help? An organization came to us, a big media organization, and said, we've got an issue with regards to engagement, retention, absenteeism is going up. Can you help us understand why, essentially? So we don't make assumptions. We try not to burden people with additional surveys, because you got more surveys than you know what to do with. And the survey provides you a moment in time piece of feedback that often takes months to process, a couple of months for the board to agree. And then by the time we've got all of that and processed it, it's 6 months later. And what happened 6 months ago is old news compared to now. Just think of conflicts in the world that have really taken off in the past 3 months, sadly, and we're seeing a lot of people are really struggling at the moment. So we need to be a bit quicker than that. So we would say we need to utilize what data you have in the organization, your primary, secondary, and your tertiary. So your attritional stats, your absenteeism, you can calculate the cost of poor well-being. That lights a fire under a C-suite's butt. I'll tell you that for nothing. They say, you're losing this many million a year. All right, well, maybe we need to do something. You overlay secondary data sets. So if people use Microsoft, you can use Microsoft Analytics, workweek data, everything else. And you can start to create some hypothesis across different demographics in the workforce. You say the voluntary attrition for women is lower and the work week is slightly lower as well. Is there a reason? Could we focus on flexibility here to create the space for people to do certain things, or this demographic is struggling, or that? Only then, once you've done that, will you overlay the tertiary data, the qualitative, to give some story to it. But that's the last piece of the puzzle, and currently it's the only piece of the puzzle. And when we do this, we see some really interesting things. And it's often not that there isn't enough apps or webinars or support, because that's what we stood up and that's where it is at the moment. It's the fact people don't have the time to access them. The user experience is absolutely atrocious. Trying to get support first instance, it takes too long. Trying to call a support service, and it's really clunky. And then equally, that there's lack of visibility, that is a priority for leadership. We saw lots of this stuff, and we redid their entire strategies. Then we went to speak to people. What do we want to see? How can we address the needs, the interests, the concerns of the various demographics? Focusing on not trying to fix people, rather creating a space where they can self-serve and fix, because there is a deal of dual accountability. You can create the space, but then again, the person has to want to do it at the same time. And you can take the horse to the Wellbeing water, but you cannot make them drink.
That was already said, this statement on this podcast, actually, by someone who you know.
Really? No way.
Guess what? Who the person was?
Oh, I've got no idea. Who
It
was it?
was Jake Sanders.
Was it? That's because we've done some work together, and I'm pretty sure we said that together. That's so funny. He's done some great work in this space and really focuses on creating the space for individuals to do what they need. And then that's when you develop that resilience, as we were saying, right? It's difficult to teach resilience in a webinar. What it's done is it's earned through personal experience and as people work through things.
You mentioned again the role of the leaders, right? So what I also see that you still need to do this top down as well, but then at the same time bottom up. So to create this individual responsibility, awareness, and when you start in an organization, you can, still start it even if there is nothing like central or guided by the leaders, and you can create a movement, but at the end you need both parties.
There's a lot of all bark, no bite with a lot of the leaders in the space. But oh yeah, make sure you prioritize your well-being, look for work-life balance. Forget work-life balance. It doesn't exist. If you wait for this thing to appear, work is always louder, it always punches harder, and it will beat life every single time. You need to put in place boundaries. So what the business can do is say, this is how we work, these are our digital boundaries, a right to disconnect, etc., etc. This is how we use the tech. This is how we set up meetings, being really clear, agenda objectives, stuff like that, and trying to create the space. And then outside of that, we have to see the leaders doing it as well. Because if they just say it, go on all hands, wax lyrical about the importance of you to focus on your well-being, but then they're sending emails at 12 p.m., it doesn't bode well. And the actions speak louder than words every single time. So they have to practice what they preach at least a bit. But then equally, certain people do want to work more, and that's absolutely fine. But then it's creating the culture that understands that you don't have to, even if I am. That's where we focus on trust, which is actually one of the key drivers of well-being. The Indeed study, the big one that Oxford collaborates on, is 18 million individuals. Yeah. They found out the key drivers of well-being. Everyone thinks it's going to be money. They're like, show me the money, give me more money, I'll be happier. I think there's a nuance to that. I think the people who are on lower salaries, I think the biggest thing you could do is just give them more money than give another app. So let's not get that twisted. But we found that it was actually the fifth biggest driver of well-being. Top was being energized by your work or having a sense of energy. Second was trust. So being trusted to do what you need. So a sense of agency and autonomy. And then a sense of belonging, feeling that you can turn up and you can be exactly who you are and share your stories and the things that you've been through. And that really makes sense if we think about it, doesn't it?
It was a similar done earlier in 2021 by the George Bersing company in the Healthy Organization study. So they also found that pay equity is really the most important part of well-being. And, sometimes we forget about it because we live also on the lucky side of the world. So, we have salary, we can have a good life, but we still have to also go back to the bottom of the Maslow pyramid.
This is why you need to look at the various demographics in the workforce. You say, if you've got low-paid workers, I'm not gonna lie, they don't give a shit about another app. They don't want it. They don't have time for it. a lot of them in DHL, they did some research. There's an amazing CEO there, Alberto Novis, and I had the pleasure to have dinner with him once, and I was chatting to him about stuff, and he said, like, we asked people what they wanted, and he said, someone spoke to him and said, I just want to put healthy hot food on the table for my family. So he said, all right, so the cafeteria is going to be free for all DHL staff, and you can take food home for your family so you can all eat well. That's what that demographic need. It isn't some convoluted process or support system. They just need to suffice like the basic needs. So you got to look across the different roles, the different pay grades, the different demographics, and that does take work. But when you get it right, your people will stay, they'll be engaged, businesses will thrive. So don't prioritize it, the business will pay. It does take work, it does take investment, but the outcome vastly outweighs the input.
So true. What about the future of well-being? You even created this hashtag, right? So how do you then see the future of well-being in organizations? And you can also add maybe your personal advice to the future of well-being leaders.
Yeah, so there's a lot in a job title, I promise. I actually created the whole concept. And I said to the company I'm at now, I said to Deloitte, I said, when I come back, this is going to be the title, because I created the concept. I think it's engaging and people want to talk about it because it's a bit different. I think the future of it at work, we spoke a bit about personal and creating space, and I think that's a whole different kettle of fish, but I don't think that's almost for the organization to do. I think that's for, they can create the space and provide the resources, but that's for each person. You talk about biometrics and stuff, and there's a lot of organizations talking about, but I almost think that's overstepping. But it's very interesting at the same time, and there'll be some people that love it and some that think that is a gross overstepping of the organization, but that obviously depends on the individual. But for organizations, it will be moving well-being specifically out of HR because it's been their responsibility so far, and that's just how it started, same as DE&I. Hopefully it will progress to a place where we don't actually have well-being or DE&I teams anymore, rather human sustainability teams. So you can tick the S of ESG. You focus on creating an inclusive and diverse workforce where an outcome is well-being. Currently, those teams are working almost against one another for resources, for eyeballs, and they're able to do not as much as they could if they pooled their collective efforts. They pull those efforts, we move away from well-being being the focus to where it's the outcome. And then you would involve different functions of the business. I haven't really seen any organization as an IT function a huge part of the well-being team, but I think they're going to be the central part for most of us who use laptops. If we need to consider how we use this, if we create space in a digital environment, we have space. As good as a policy is, or an app or anything else, you can't meditate or whatever 14-hour day. And it's the tech and the workload that is the issue for a lot of us. So for me, that would be the move forward. Then we'll have always on measurements. We'll see, like, the leadership will see live each month, the attrition, the rationale for leaving, the sick, the preventable. They'll see the work week data, the holiday days taken. We'll start to draw a hypothesis that little trips over the year are better than the big ones. We'll try and get leaders to exemplify that. Then we're constantly seeing what's happening. We're able to shift the business to support the people within and create the environments where ultimately they can be productive, happy, and healthy at the same time, because they're not competing things. That's what I think it will look like. And then we'll have transparent organizations, because you've got the new regulation coming out in the EU, the CSR directive, that's going to require reporting on certain wellbeing things. Currently, it's very little. Don't get me wrong, but it's going to begin to change the way that organizations have to report on this stuff. And the very forward-thinking ones will think, all right, let's just make ourselves a glass box. There's some companies that share all salaries open. So that's your gender pay gap sort, right? Because you can't share openly. Then if you have transparency with regards to working hours across the different functions in the business, you don't have to write work-life balance in your job description anymore. You can just show people how people are working. And if you operate like that, that's a business that I want to come in. A transparent culture that's like always on with regards to feedback and data, moving away from sentiment and opinion. And then I think we can focus on like leveraging all the tools in the workplace to create the space where we can all thrive and prioritize what we need as individuals. So what would you rather? Another webinar they tell you what you need to do, or 5-10 minutes in between meetings? I know what I would prefer, because I'm running straight from this one to another one because I'm late for the call. I think that's the shift. That's the mindset shift, and that's the place I would love to go to.
Yeah, we agreed that we will finish on time, so you will still have some bio break between.
Get some water
so
and
we
go to the
need
toilet
to
quickly.
practice what they preach. All right, so you would say that the future of well-being is measurement, and the measurement would help to create more like a human-centric environment, and human sustainability is the way to go. Mm?
Exactly, because then you tick so many boxes that are all different efforts at the moment. Then you bring and pull those people together. And I think those people that do that, I think they'll be enlightened and pretty cool cultures.
Last question, and then we let you go to the next meeting. What
But
is your personal way to be well and maintain your well-being?
yeah, I've flirted with loads of different things. I think I almost have a bit of an obsessive nature, and I think it comes from when I had my injury and I was in that deep place, and then I took complete control of everything to lose the weight, and I went too far, and I was counting every single calorie, obsessing over bodybuilding articles, stepping on a scale every morning, taking weight loss pills, everything else, and it really wasn't good. But I looked good, but I didn't feel good, and I flipped the switch between that, and I think now I've got this awful mustache that luckily no one can see, so I'm getting ready for November. I
So
don't
November, right?
exactly, not Charlie Bronson, but so I'm now focusing more about how I feel and not just the physical aspect, because that for me is really easy to control, the diet and everything else. I've actually relaxed a bit of it. If I want a hot chocolate, I'll have it. If I want a beer, I'll have it. So I'm just trying to focus on being like 85% good most days instead of being absolutely perfect and like castigating myself for getting it wrong. So I'm trying not to be completely well, if that makes sense, make mistakes, do things, live a bit, try and eat well most of the time, try and meditate most of the time, try and get up at 6 most of the time so I can go to the gym. 2 days this week I missed it, but I'm actually okay with it. And for the first time in my life, I probably feel quite happy and relaxed with where I'm at.
Thank you for sharing. I know that this is not an easy journey that you have been through. It also requires a lot of courage. So I really appreciate that in you.
Absolutely my pleasure. We got time for another question. Is there anything else that we want to talk about? Let's do that. I can squeeze a quick coffee in before the next one.
Okay, let's do that. Still have some questions that I haven't asked. Maybe one around, the human sustainability, because this term was coined by Deloitte in a way. How do you see that right now resonating with your clients or even within Deloitte? Because Deloitte is so big, and I know that the Swiss Deloitte is not the same as the UK Deloitte.
It's the perfect time for people to change. We got in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority have made a lot. They've almost taken the EU CSRD and added multiple elements of like D&I metrics that need to be disclosed for all financial organizations. And we're seeing this across the board. It's happening in each country piecemeal. So there's little bits happening. If organizations can figure around this, and then they take the approach I was discussing, they can pull resource, they'll be more effective, they can stop worrying so much about putting on the events and worry about the virtue signaling things that we see in a lot of places, often well-meaning, as I said, but are they changing the dial? And then we can lean into the things that can have the biggest impact. And I think it's a little bit soon for a lot of people. Often people only do this when they're pushed. And I think there'll be a last minute scramble to hit all the metrics, the disclosure and the elements from the EU CSRD, which can be rolled out over the next 5 years. Same with the FCA. But then I think we'll start to see this approach, that transparent approach, being a huge part of the employee value proposition. And money isn't free anymore with inflation. People can't just compete on pushing up salaries, or they can, certain organizations, but most can't. And most people value flexibility, that sense of agency, much more than a bump in salary. I think the Microsoft Future of Work report says that people value geographic flexibility about 10% of salary. They would sacrifice for that. Then if you add on temporal flexibility, a culture where you can bring your full self, where you see people who look and will grow up the same way that you did, I think ultimately that's going to be a huge part of why people join businesses. So I think it's only going to grow in importance. I think it's early for a lot of people to jump on it. There'll be a few enlightened organizations that do, but I think often it's only when they have to is when they do it, and then see the tide starts.
Yeah. I mean, the same happened with environmental sustainability as
Exactly.
well, right? One last question. What is your favorite metric, or that you think that, this one should be really looked at by organization or brought into the human sustainability reporting ones?
That's a great question. I love it. The headline one is attrition, but there's two sides of the coin. So I'm going to give you a longer answer, and I can't just give you one metric. I'm sorry. But
Damn.
you get the attrition, but there's two sides of the coin. So you want to understand the attrition, the rationale, and then that cost of people leaving the business due to poor well-being is often enough to set it as a business priority. The flip side of it is attrition currently is lower. It's dropped compared to last year and the year before quite significantly because there's a difficult job market at the moment and economic headwinds, redundancies across the piece. So people are staying put where they are. And you think, well, that's good. Not necessarily. You think about all the trends that we're seeing at the moment, the quiet quitters, the lazy girl jobs, all that stuff. So because people are not leaving now, they're actively disengaged inside the organization. And we see that in Gallup's State of the Workplace report, 26% of the global workforce being engaged. That means 74% are not engaged. Lots are actively disengaged. And it takes 5 engaged people to counteract 1 actively disengaged person who's sabotaging the organization. So attrition can tell you a lot. But then obviously there's nuance that depends on it. If it's low, is that good or bad? Does that then mean it's a bit stale and we could do with some new people thinking in different ways? But I often think that alone tells a really interesting story. And if you dig one level deeper, you can start to pull up some really, really interesting insights. Your work week data, your rationale, the needs of the demographics, and then you're off to the races. But yeah, not just one, but that's where I would start.
Thanks for this answer. So I don't let you ask me to ask another question because I think you need a bio break now. Let's really focus on your well-being after a hard or difficult morning. So thanks a lot for being with us today, and very much looking forward to following your journey, and we will keep in touch.
Absolute pleasure. And keep an eye out. January, my book's coming out.
Exactly. Yeah, I am very happy to link your TEDx talk as well. And if you have already a book pre-launch link, I will do that for the podcast listeners.
Well, thanks for having me.
Ciao, Ryan. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wellbeing Designers podcast. Reach out if you or your organization needs expertise, inspiration, why and how to create a well-being culture and how to upskill your people, your leaders with future well-being skills. I am doing a lot of keynotes nowadays, inspirational workshops for leaders to really connect the dots for them, why to invest into well-being. I also work with well-being leaders together to advise them on the well-being strategy and how to place well-being in the organization, how to scale it. And then we are working on the Wellbeing Academy. So if you are interested for next year, how to scale well-being skills in the organization within your employees, please get in touch. If you would like to keep in touch with me, with us, sign up to the Wellbeing Designers newsletter. You can do this on our website, www.wellbeing.design. You can reach out to me via the website or via LinkedIn. I am very happy to connect with other wellbeing designers from all over the world. Remember, together we can design a human-centric work life and the future of well-being.